Hi everyone, my name's Diabetor and it's currently Christmas, so you know what that means. A big wave of noobs has entered Elden Ring. I personally cannot wait to bust out my level 15 Invader Smurf build and absolutely stomp countless noobs into the ground. Alas, I have a soft heart and I can't stand to have such an overwhelming advantage over them. Well, okay, I can, and I in fact do enjoy that, but I'm also nice. So today, I'm going to even the playing field just a little bit by giving you new players a guide on how to get started in Elden Ring. This is a huge and deep game with a lot of mechanics, and it can definitely feel overwhelming at times. But after following this guide, you'll be confident in your knowledge of where to go, what to do, and how to do it. Make sure you check out the timestamps down in the description so you can see what different tips and stuff I'll be telling you, and if you find this video helpful, please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. And with all that said, let's get into Elden Ring. First, I want to set you up with some universal information that applies to any class you choose and any build you make. These are going to be the basics of the game and the fundamentals of how you should approach it, so above all else, make sure you follow my advice in this section of the guide. Elden Ring's core gameplay loop looks something like this. You explore a huge open world in which you'll find dungeons and other places full of bad guys and loot. You have a set number of healing flasks which determine how many mistakes you can make before you die. You'll find sites of grace throughout the world and larger dungeons, and these are basically checkpoints where you can respawn if you die. Alternatively, if you're in a dungeon and you've made too many mistakes, and you're not sure you can make it to the next grace without dying, you can head back to the previous grace and rest at it to refresh your character and refill your flasks. This comes at a cost, however, because it'll also make most or all of the enemies respawn. But now that you have an idea of what to expect, hopefully you can do better this time and make it further in before running out of flasks, preferably to the next grace. Along the way, you'll gain rooms from killing enemies and find weapons, spells, armor, and other loot which you can use to upgrade your weapons and improve your build. Do this enough, and once you reach the boss, you'll be able to kill them for lots of runes and strong loot. And once you're done with the dungeon, you can go back to the open world and repeat the process. Now, I want to address the most common questions people have when they start this game. Why the hell is it so hard? How do people have fun dying over and over again? And the answer to those questions are as follows. 1. It's seriously not nearly as hard as you think it is, trust me. And 2, they don't. Dying is absolutely something you're gonna have to get used to in this game, but there are some pretty simple tips which aren't always immediately apparent to new players. I know I definitely had a hard time before I realized some of this stuff, and once you follow them, you're gonna die a lot less and have a way better time with Elden Ring. Number 1, above all else, if there is anything that you take away from this video, let it be this. Level your fucking Vigor stat. This is usually the thing which determines whether or not somebody is gonna have a good time with Elden Ring. Vigor determines your maximum health. This is a game where there are lots of enemies which attack you fast and hit hard, so it should go without saying that increasing your max health is a good way to stay alive. In fact, it's the best way to stay alive. Vigor is far and away the most efficient stat to level in terms of what returns you get per point spent in it. Compared to what you get from wearing heavy armor sets, it's not even close. A few points into Vigor can increase your effective health by upwards of 300 to 450%, whereas the heaviest armor sets in the game will increase it by only around 33%. Believe me, I know you want to level your strength so you can do more damage with your big-ass sword, or level your intelligence so you can do more damage with your pew-pew lasers, or level endurance so you can wear super heavy armor, but none of that matters if you don't have the Vigor to back it up. If you have a sword that can kill the bad guys in 3 hits, but the bad guys can kill you in 1 hit, then you're never going to kill the bad guys, right? You might think that you can just dodge good and don't get hit, but that's a skill which takes a lot of practice and memorization to learn. And even the best players in the world, like Gino Machino, who is so badass that he regularly beats literally all 207 bosses in the game without getting hit a single time. Even he will level Vigor up when he's not doing a no-hit run, because it's seriously just that important. It doesn't matter what your build is, doesn't matter if you're a mage who stays at range from your enemies, or if you're a dude with a big ass shield and super heavy armor, you seriously need Vigor in this game. My recommendation is that you level Vigor to 30 before you level up any other stats. Seriously, get 30 Vigor before you put a single point in any other stat. Trust me. After that, you can level up your other stats a bit. I'll talk about that more in the build section of this video. And then you want to get 40 Vigor by the time you reach Renala in Raya Lucaria Academy. She's basically the second major boss. And you want 60 Vigor by the end of the game. Follow this leveling scheme and you will have a great time with Elden Ring, I promise. Number 2. So you might be saying, okay Diabetor, Vigor is cool and all, but how do I kill the bad guys if I don't level up my damage stats? That's a good question, and my answer is that you're wrong about the importance of your damage stats. The second thing which I often see people struggle with, and which makes them bounce off of this game, is that they neglect to upgrade their weapons. Everyone just kind of assumes that Elden Ring is like other RPGs, where your character's stats have a major impact on the effectiveness of your weapons and stuff, but at least in the early game, that's just not how Elden Ring works. In Elden Ring, most of your damage comes from weapon upgrades and buffs. I often see people not upgrade their weapons, and then they go through like half of the game wondering why every boss fight is a slog and their huge swords hit like wet noodles. We'll talk about buffs more in a minute, but weapon upgrades are super simple. As you explore, you'll find smithing stones throughout the world. You can take these smithing stones to an anvil or a blacksmith and use them to upgrade your weapons. This will increase the base damage of the weapon, as well as the attribute scaling, which determines how much damage you get from your stats. We'll talk about that more later. And together, these things will significantly increase your damage. As a quick example, here's a heavy brick hammer at +0, so it's not upgraded at all. This hammer gets the highest strength scaling in the game, so leveling strength is really good at increasing its damage. If I level my strength to 99 and two-hand it, which increases my effective strength by 50%, meaning I essentially have 148 strength, you'll see it gets about 249 attack power. Meanwhile, if I take that same hammer, give my character the bare minimum strength required to wield it, and just upgrade the hammer, the first one gets outclassed by the time this hammer reaches +6 out of a maximum upgrade of +25. Believe me, it is way faster and easier to get a literally infinite supply of smithing stones to reach +6 or even higher than it is to get 99 in any stats. I'll tell you where you can find tons of smithing stones later on, but seriously, make sure you explore and keep an eye out for them and upgrade your weapons as often as possible. Even your starting weapon can easily carry you through to the end of the game as long as you make sure you keep upgrading it, and there are tons of smithing stones out there, so don't be afraid to upgrade your stuff and make sure you do it as often as you can. Number 3, buffs. If you ever watch any kind of gameplay video where you see the dude just taking off huge chunks of the enemy's health, or even one-shotting bosses and stuff, you might wonder how they pull that off. The answer is buffs. Buffs are a quick and easy way to significantly increase the effectiveness of your build, and there are a bunch of buffs you can get literally within 10 minutes of starting the game, and which work for any build. Now, if you want to one-shot bosses, then yeah, you're going to need to put a lot of effort into buffing, and you're going to have to stack like 20 different buffs. But if you want to just have a really solid and practical build, then you only need like 3 or 4 buffs, and you'll be good to go for pretty much the entire game. Some of these buffs are literally free, and it breaks my heart whenever I see someone walk into a boss fight without even using the most basic ones, so make sure you use buffs. On screen right now you'll see a couple things. One is a list of buffs. I'll put some notes about which buffs do what, but you can Google these and go grab them really easily to add them to your arsenal. The second is a card which will link to my quick start guide, which shows you where you can go to grab a few of these buffs, as well as a ton of other useful and important stuff. It'll take you about 20 to 30 minutes to follow it, and it'll get you set up with a bunch of really important stuff, as well as some more tips about how to succeed in Elden Ring. Number 4, equip load. Make sure you are not in heavy equip load. You can see your current equip load on the bottom right of your equipment screen. I'll write about the specifics of equip load in the description, but basically if you have too much stuff equipped, then your dodge rolls will get worse. If you end up in heavy load, then you need to unequip some weapons and or put on lighter armor, or just take some armor off, and get back down into medium load. Even if you're using a shield and so dodging isn't that important to you, you still really don't want to be in heavy load because it reduces your stamina regen speed, which is important for blocking with a shield. Heavy load is always bad. Number 5, the tutorial. I'm not going to go too in depth here because it should be pretty self-explanatory. At the very start of the game, there's a ghost you can talk to, and he tells you to go into the Cave of Knowledge below him. This is the tutorial, where the game teaches you the basic controls and concepts that you need to know in order to beat the game. Play the fucking tutorial! So many people don't do the tutorial, and so they don't know the most basic stuff in this game. Play the tutorial, make sure you read the information prompts, they're not that long, reading them won't fucking kill you, and you will be much more well prepared for this game. Also, keep in mind that you can redo the tutorial at any time, and that those info prompts are available in your inventory under the Info tab if you ever need a quick refresher. Alright, so this section is going to cover more than just where to go, but I gave it that title for that sweet search engine optimization. Anyway, Elden Ring is a mostly non-linear open-world game, where your goal is to explore, find bosses, and kill them. Along the way, you'll find weapons, armor, talismans which give unique effects, Ashes of War which add powerful skills to your weapons, all different sorts of magic spells, and more. If you make sure to be curious and explore, and keep your eyes open, you'll have no trouble figuring out where to go and getting the gear you need to beat this game. With all that said, here are some exploration tips that'll help you out. The Gatefront. This is going to be a small section, but basically, when you start the game you won't have your horse or the ability to level up. You need to follow the road directly north from where you started and you'll find the Gatefront Ruins. On the left side of the ruins you'll see a Site of Grace. Go activate that and sit down at it, and Melina will appear and give you Torrent and the ability to level up. I want to make sure I mention this because lots of guides don't tell people that this grace is guaranteed to make her immediately spawn, and getting her Accord quickly lets you just get straight into the full game experience. Maps. When you start the game, your map will be blank and covered in a fog of war. As you move around, you'll clear the fog of war, but the map itself will be mostly featureless. However, you'll be able to see the major roads which lead through each region, and you'll also see these obelisk icons. These are map fragments. Head to them and pick up those maps to fill in a part of your map. This will reveal the full detail of everything around you so you know where you are and so you can find stuff to explore really easily. Make sure you grab the map fragments as soon as possible after entering new regions. The level of detail on these maps is really good, and there are a lot of cool and important places marked on them, such as roads, ruins, buildings, mine shafts which have lots of smithing stones, big ash trees, evergails, churches which often contain important upgrade materials, castles, and so on. If you're ever lost or you don't know where to go next, it's always a good idea to open your map, look for a structure of some kind, place a beacon on it, and just go to it and see what you find. Roads. I mentioned the roads already, but they're useful enough that I want to give them their own little section. The developers put these roads in the game for a reason. They usually lead to cool or important places. Again, if you're ever stuck and you don't quite know where you should go next, consider just getting on a road and following it. Keep your eyes open and observe the things you pass by, like ruins and towers and stuff, and check them out as you go along. You'll run into something interesting eventually. The Guidance of Grace. Certain sites of grace will have a pointer extending out from them, which leads to something important. You can see these pointers on your map as well. These usually lead to a major dungeon or a place with a major quest. Following these pointers is completely optional, and you do not have to follow them. In fact, it's usually a good idea not to follow them at first, which I'll explain more in a minute. These are just suggestions about where you should go next and reminders about where something important might be, like the Graces in Limgrave which lead you to Stormvale Castle, where you'll find the first major boss. Also, keep in mind that these pointers never disappear or change. Like if I go to Stormvale and kill the boss there, this Site of Grace will still have its pointer going towards Stormvale, so don't expect these things to show you everywhere you're supposed to go. Come back later. Like I just mentioned, it's often a good idea not to follow the Guidance of Grace at first. It'll be easiest to explain this if I just show you what I mean. So at the start of the game, there are graces which point you to Stormveil Castle. You follow those graces and go to the castle, and you're greeted by Margit the Fell Omen, who will most likely kick your ass, repeatedly. This is another one of those points where people often bounce off of this game, because they go where the grace tells them to go, get their ass kicked by Margit, and then complain that the game is too hard and quit. What they don't realize is that the developers put Margit here as a gatekeeper. If you get to him and he's too hard, then you're not ready for the rest of the game. You're supposed to go explore somewhere else, level up, upgrade your weapons, and come back to him when you're stronger. The devs designed this huge open world with all different sorts of cool shit to do and find. They don't want you to just beeline it towards all the major bosses, they want you to explore this awesome game they made. And there's actually a boss even earlier than Margit, which is also supposed to teach you this same lesson, the Tree Sentinel. You see him as soon as you leave the tutorial area. He's a big-ass dude on a comically huge horse. In front of you there's a road, which most people will instinctively think to follow, and there's also a big open field, both of which lead to the church up ahead. The Tree Sentinel is on the road, and so when you go along the road, he's gonna attack you and probably kick your ass. Most people will try to fight him again and again and lose every time, and at this point you've got two options. You can either keep bashing your head against him and see if you can manage to beat him before you get too frustrated and rage quit, or you can go across the field instead, avoiding him in the process, get to the church where there's an anvil and a smithing stone, thus suggesting to the player that they should upgrade their weapons, and realize that you should probably upgrade your stuff and come back to the Tree Sentinel later. Now don't get me wrong, if you can beat him or Margit, then they're good sources of early runes and useful gear, and that goes for any boss in the game. You could beat this entire game at level 1 if you really wanted to. It's an open world game, so there's nothing stopping you from going to harder bosses and fighting them first, and if you manage to win, you'll get that reward for being able to pull off a win at a lower level. But that's probably not going to be super fun on your first playthrough, and so you should go explore elsewhere to find equipment, smithing stones, and easier side bosses to kill for runes. This applies throughout the entire game. If a boss is too hard for you, go explore somewhere else and come back later when you're stronger. This section is going to talk about leveling up in Elden Ring, strategies for what to level up and why you should level it up, and how not to level up. Let's just get right into it. What stats should you level up? What do your different stats do, and when are they important? Vigor. This increases your max health, fire defense, and immunity. So I already went on a rant about how it is extremely important that you level Vigor, preferably to 40 as soon as possible, for the max HP increases it gives you. And I'm not going to go over all that again here. As for the fire defense, that just slightly reduces the fire damage you take. It's generally not super important to worry about your defense stats. Keep in mind that this is different from damage negation, which is important. Immunity determines your resistance to poison and scarlet rot, and having more is better, so keep in mind that leveling Vigor will make you more resistant to those effects. Mind. This increases your max FP and focus. FP, also known as focus points or mana, is your blue bar. You use this to cast spells, use skills, and also for certain consumables. This is mostly something for mages to increase, so if you're a melee-focused build, you probably don't need more than about 15 mind tops. However, there are also spirit ashes, see my video about them to learn more, and these usually require FP to summon, so if you intend to use the more expensive ones, then having more mind or mind-raising equipment can come in handy. Your focus is a stat which determines your resistance to the sleep and madness status effects. These are pretty rare in PvE, and mostly only important in PvP, so for the sake of this guide, we're not going to worry too much about that. Endurance. This increases your max stamina and equip load, as well as your robustness. Stamina is your green bar and determines how many actions you can do in combat in a row. Having more stamina is better, but you really don't need all that much of it, and so you shouldn't think too much about stamina when you're leveling endurance. Endurance is mostly important for the equip load, which determines how much gear you can have equipped without getting a penalty to your dodge rolls. I'll write more about this down in the description, but I'll say here for most builds, 15 to 20 endurance is usually more than enough. Armor doesn't do all that much for you in this game, so you really shouldn't worry about trying to wear the really heavy sets for protection. If you're wearing them for fashion, then that's your prerogative. And you shouldn't have more than 1 or 2 weapons equipped at a time, so you really shouldn't need to waste too many points in endurance. Meanwhile, your robustness determines your resistance to bleed and frostbite buildup, which is nice to have, but you get plenty of that by wearing any decent light or medium armor, so don't worry too much about getting it from endurance. Strength, Dexterity, Intelligence, Faith, and Arcane. I'm grouping these all together because they all do basically the same thing. These are your damage stats. They determine which weapons and spells you can use. You can see a weapon's stat requirements on its information page, or a spell's stat requirements in the Memorize Spell menu. If you don't meet the stat requirements for a weapon, then you can still use it, but it's going to do basically no damage and its Ash of War won't work properly. Furthermore, if you have a weapon which scales with one of these stats, then leveling that stat will increase the weapon's damage. For example, here I have a club which has a C in strength scaling and has no scaling in any other stats. If I level up my strength, then that will make the club do more damage. If I level up dexterity, then that will have no effect on the club because the club doesn't have dex scaling. Similarly, here's a sword with strength, dexterity, and intelligence scaling. Leveling up strength or dex will increase its physical damage, and leveling up intelligence will increase its magic damage. So basically, you should level up your stats based on the weapons you want to use. If you want to use weapons that get intelligence scaling, then level intelligence. If you want to use strength weapons, level strength. The damage stats also have some other effects, like increasing your different defenses, but those don't particularly matter, so we're not going to worry about them. Arcane will increase your item discovery, which makes it slightly more likely for you to get drops from enemies, but unless you're trying to farm a specific weapon or armor, it really doesn't do all that much. And finally, people often think that dexterity increases your attack speed, and this is false. There is no way to increase your attack speed in Elden Ring. Dexterity does not increase your attack speed. Each weapon has a predetermined attack speed, and that's it. Your Colossal Sword is always going to be slow as fuck. That's just a fundamental part of its moveset. Dex actually does slightly increase your spellcasting speed, but that's very slight and only really matters in PvP, so you probably shouldn't worry too much about it. Can you tell I wanted that timestamp to factor into my search engine optimization? Anyway, I'm going to tell you straight up, and just bear with me here. Farming runes is a complete waste of time in Elden Ring. Stats are not what makes your character powerful. On screen, you'll see an image macro I made for the official Elden Ring Discord server. In fact, I'm an expert there. Stop by and say hi. And you can pause and read that, but basically, it's proof that being a really high level does not suddenly make the game easy mode. Quite frankly, Renala is a super easy boss, and you're supposed to fight her at like level 40 to 50. The dude in this image was level 232, which cost him 30 million runes to level up to, and despite that, he still needed help fighting Renala. He even had a somewhat decent build in terms of his stats and the staff he was using, and he still could not beat her without help. Why? Like I said in part 1, most of your power in this game comes from Vigor, which can only do so much for you. Weapon upgrades. The staff he's using is the only weapon in the game which can't be upgraded, but it is fairly strong in the early game. And buffs, of which he had none. You can level your intelligence as high as you want, but if your staff isn't upgraded, and the boss you're fighting is resistant to magic, then you aren't going to do shit for damage. You can level your Vigor as high as you want, and you should, but if you don't learn how to dodge, then you're gonna run out of health eventually. And that's not even mentioning the fact that you need to upgrade your healing flasks to even be able to heal that much HP. And the only way to upgrade your flasks is to go explore and find golden seeds and sacred tears. You can't farm them. Now, yeah, if you need a few thousand runes to buy some smithing stones, or to pay for a weapon upgrade, or to just cap off that next level up, then sure, go farm for a few minutes. But spending hours and hours, in this dude's case, my math came out to him spending at least 14 hours of just fucking pressing L2 over and over again. Spending hours farming runes will not suddenly make the game easy mode, and that's by design. The bosses at the start of the game are nowhere near as strong as the bosses at the end of the game. You don't need to be level 232 to beat them, and in fact, most people will finish the game at around level 125. Like I said before, the devs want you to explore around and find easy bosses and all the side dungeons they made, and upgrade your weapons with smithing stones and stuff, and try out the cool gear and stuff you find, and progress through the game in a way that is rewarding and fun. I can't stop you from farming runes if you want to, but it is genuinely a major part of why so many people struggle with this game, because they assume that making the numbers bigger will make the game easier, and you should be aware that this just isn't true. What you do with your time is up to you, but my final words on this subject, in this video at least, will be that even From Software told people that levels aren't everything in this game. So, when you level up, what stats should you increase and when? I mentioned earlier that I strongly recommend you get 30 Vigor as soon as possible. I don't care what your class is or what build you're aiming for. When you make a new character, your first goal should be to get level 30 Vigor as soon as possible, and you'll also want to upgrade your weapons as high as possible too. You can have the coolest, flashiest build in the world, but if you don't have Vigor, then you're going to keep dying over and over again. So get that shit to 30 as soon as possible. In the process of exploring and killing side bosses for runes to get that 30 Vigor, you'll probably come across some weapons and spells and stuff that you want to use. So my advice is that once you reach 30 Vigor, take a look through the cool stuff you've found or seen online and decide what kind of weapons you want to use and make a build based around that. You can get the minimum stats required for that weapon and then use smithing stones to upgrade it for more damage. You really don't want to spread your stats out either, so make sure you focus on one damage stat, and also some endurance, a little bit of mind if necessary, and then more points into your damage stat and more vigor. There's no universal rules for how to level up your builds, so you're really going to need like a guide or someone to give you advice. And you can come ask me for advice down in the comments, or join the official Elden Ring Discord server linked in the description and ask for help there. You might even see me. My main rule of thumb is that once you reach Renala in Ray of Lucaria Academy, she's generally the second major boss most people will fight after Godric and Stormveil. By the time you reach her, you should have 40 Vigor. After that, you can focus on your damage stat of choice, as well as some mind and endurance if needed, and then by the time you reach the Erdtree, that's when you want to start working towards 60 Vigor so that you're prepared for the endgame. For the final section of this guide, I'm going to tell you about how to succeed in Elden Ring's combat system. Before we get into that, though, I just want to tell you real quick that your starting class is basically meaningless in this game. Your starting class just determines your starting equipment and your starting stats. All of the different equipment that each class starts with can be found throughout the world regardless of which class you pick. Like, people often suggest starting as Samurai because of his Uchi Katana, and that is a good choice, but you can literally go get that sword 5 minutes into the game on any other character. So unless you want to dual wield Uchi Katanas, the Samurai isn't like unique because he has that sword. The same thing goes for all the weapons, spells, and armor that the different classes start with. They can all be obtained by any class just by finding them in the world, and most of them are found pretty early on. As for your starting stats, any class can level any stats. Like, for example, the Astrologer is supposed to be like the pure sorcery class who casts magic spells, and the Hero is supposed to be like a heavy weapon wielding strength barbarian kind of guy, right? But there's literally nothing stopping me from making an Astrologer and leveling up strength so that I can use a big ass club to bonk shit. And there's nothing stopping me from leveling up intelligence on a Hero and getting a staff to cast spells with. Any class can do anything. Your starting class mainly just affects whether or not you can do those things at the very start of the game. Now, starting class can also be important if you want to make an optimized build at a specific level for multiplayer, but that's really not something you should worry about as a brand new player, so I'm not going to talk about that in this video. With that out of the way, I'm just going to go over the basics of Elden Ring's combat system and how you should approach it. Elden Ring's combat can be as basic or as complicated as you want it to be. If you want it to just be, you dodge an attack and then hit the bad guy and repeat, then go for it. If you want to do all of these cool flashy moves and combine spells and all different sorts of buffs and stuff, then you can go for it. You have a ton of options for how you approach encounters with enemies and boss fights. The main concepts that you need to understand no matter what are when you should dodge and when you should attack. Elden Ring isn't really a slow-paced game per se, but the developers want you to be really deliberate with your actions. You get punished a lot for spamming attacks without thinking, or for panic rolling when you see an enemy winding up an attack. If you want to succeed, then you need to learn the importance of being deliberate with your actions. Enemies and bosses generally won't allow you to just walk up to them and attack them. Usually they'll attack right before you do, or they'll input read your attack and dodge. This sounds annoying, and it kinda is, but it's really there to prevent the game from being boring as shit, because think about it. If you could just walk up to every single enemy and combo them to death without any resistance, that would get real old real fast, right? So what the developers want you to do is bait out an attack from an enemy, dodge it, and then use their recovery animation to get attacks in. I'll expand upon that in a second, but being able to dodge or block enemy attacks is a super important skill that you should practice. Some attacks are super telegraphed and you can see them coming from a mile away. Other attacks have delays that require you to learn their timing, lest you roll too early and get caught by the attack at the end of your dodge. The best way to learn how to dodge an attack is just to practice it. If you're struggling with an enemy, then go up to it and don't even try to attack. Just practice dodging that enemy's moves, and once you've got the hang of that, then you can start practicing how to take advantage of the enemy's punish windows. I should also mention that not every attack is meant to be dodged. There are a lot of attacks where your best option is actually to just back away from them or sprint away. Dodging isn't always the best choice for dealing with an enemy's attacks, so keep that in mind if you find that dodging isn't working against an enemy. And finally, your jumps also give you a lot of options for dodging attacks. In fact, your legs get invulnerability frames during jumps. So if an enemy is doing like a stomp or a shockwave attack, or some kind of low sweeping attack, you can probably jump it, which also gives you the opportunity to get a jumping attack in for some extra damage and a ton of style. Something else I want to mention real quick is that a lot of enemies have get off me bro moves. Take Godric for example. He likes to do this Stormcaller attack, which punishes you for being too close to him. Contrary to popular belief, this attack is very dodgeable. You can see him wind up his arm before he does it. However, it does come out fairly quickly, which can make it difficult to dodge. And the way you're actually supposed to deal with it is by not being close to him when he does it. Yeah, I'm not saying that you have to spam magic spells at him from a distance or anything like that. That is an option if you want to. But even as a pure melee character, the best way to avoid this attack is to dodge his moves, get close to him for an attack or two, and then instead of spamming the attack button, which locks you into attack animations and prevents you from dodging, instead of spamming the attack button, you should back off. Usually you'll get out of range from this attack before he even has time to fully start it up, as long as you just don't get too greedy. This kind of get off me bro move is something that a lot of bosses can do, like Malenia's infamous waterfowl dance. So don't spend all your time right up in the boss's face, because you will get punished for it at some point. Speaking of which, you have opportunities to punish the boss too, and these are called punish windows. Elden Ring's combat essentially boils down to a process of learning and mastering the enemy's punish windows. There are some enemies and bosses which people often struggle with landing hits on because they attack you as soon as you go to attack them, or they input read your attack and dodge it. Like I said, you want to be deliberate with your actions. If you just run up to the enemy and try wildly swinging at them, then they're gonna attack you while you can't cancel your attack animation, and you're gonna get hit. The trick is that you're not supposed to just walk up to the enemy and attack them from a neutral position. You're supposed to bait out enemy attacks, dodge them, and then while the enemy is recovering from their attack animation, that punish window is when you should attack. It's kind of like a turn-based game in a way, where you let them have their turn and then you retaliate afterwards. Punish windows are super important in this game, and you should do your best to identify and practice taking advantage of them. it's often best to approach combat in a dodge, hit, dodge kind of fashion, where you dodge an enemy's attack, hit them, and then back off and get ready to dodge and repeat the process. Now, with that said, you don't have to use punish windows to attack. For one, punish windows are also often healing windows as well. Let's look at this Godskin Apostle, for example. I'm low on health, and I gotta heal, but he has this super annoying habit of input reading my heals and throwing fireballs at me while I'm drinking a flask, thus wasting the flask or potentially killing me. If I want to heal during this fight, then I gotta go balls to the wall, bait out an attack from him, despite being at low health myself, and then during that punish window where he cannot attack me, that is when I can safely heal. Some people find this kind of thing annoying, but I think it's great. It would be boring as hell if in every boss fight, whenever you needed to heal, you just ran away from the boss and drank a flask in the corner and then just went back in, right? The devs want to create these exciting, ass-clenching moments where you dodge an attack by the skin of your teeth when that attack could kill you, and then you heal and you feel like a badass for dodging it and doing this high-octane, high-risk maneuver. So keep that in mind and think about it like that, because it will greatly improve your time with this game. It sure did for me. And so back to talking about punish windows, number 2 is that I should also mention dodging is not necessary in this game. It's highly recommended. You get invulnerability frames during dodges, and dodging will typically use less stamina than blocking an attack, and it also just looks cool as fuck. But you don't have to if you don't want to, or if you can't for whatever reason. Not only do you have access to shields, which you can use to block attacks, it's probably better to block an attack and take some chip damage than it is to take a full-on hit because you failed to dodge it, right? But you've also got access to other things like Hyperarmor. Some of your attacks, usually two-handed attacks with big weapons or casting certain spells, will give you Hyperarmor, which prevents you from getting stunned out of your attack animation. This is also known as Poise. This allows you to trade hits with an enemy, which can be really useful and fun depending on your build. For example, if you're using a huge, slow weapon like a colossal weapon, then your attacks are going to be really slow, and it'll typically be harder to play without getting hit. But if you can just take advantage of that Hyperarmor and just tank hits while dealing tons of damage in return. You've also got Ashes of War which provide Hyperarmor, such as Lion's Claw, which lets you tank your way through basically anything. Or even better, you've got Endure, which can go on any weapon and lets you tank your way through literally anything, because it gives you infinite hyper armor, also known as super armor, and it gives you 45% damage resistance for 3 seconds. Endure is a super useful tool to have on any build, because if you're fighting a boss and you're struggling to dodge its attacks, you can just use Endure as a sort of safety net to tank them instead. Yeah, you'll take damage, but having that 45% damage negation will make it a lot less painful than just failing to dodge the attack entirely. Combine that with high vigor and other damage negation buffs, and you can even become super tanky super easily. So don't feel like you have to dodge everything, because you don't. I'm going to end this guide here, because I've somehow managed to write 11 pages worth of stuff without even realizing it, and that's after cutting out a bunch of stuff. So the most important things you can do to have a good experience with Elden Ring are to level your vigor, upgrade your weapons, use buffs, learn how to dodge, and most importantly, try not to get frustrated. You will die in this game, but each death is a learning experience. You went around a corner and an enemy jumped out and stabbed you in the back? Now you know he's there and you'll be ready for him next time. You're fighting a boss and it does a whole new move you haven't seen before? Now you know to expect that attack when you see him winding up the attack animation. Keep practicing, keep learning, don't be afraid to ask for help in the comments or in the official Elden Ring Discord server, and this game will be very rewarding. I love this game, and I am extremely grateful for the privilege to not only help you enjoy it, but to also get paid by YouTube to do so. So thank you everyone for watching this video and supporting my channel. It's been a good year for my YouTube channel. I'm really proud of how much I've grown this year, and I really can't thank you all enough for, the support and the subscriptions and stuff. Yeah. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. I'll see you in the lands between. My name is Diabedor, and I will catch you later.